Okay, TB Nation, you wanted Zach, you got it. This bad boy is finally getting exposed. And Zach has done a lot of work to make his backstory so confusing that you can't really pin him on anything. You see, he uses comedy as a cover for his actual heinous acts. So just who is this Zach Amico, and how did he get to his position? Well, buckle up, because this story is gonna get wild. So before Zach was the zany character we know today, apparently he was a very shy person who didn't speak much. And when he was a young teen, even his own family became very concerned about him when he didn't seem to want to do anything except watch the 2001 brilliant comedy movie Evolution. And people that knew him back then even claimed that the movie Evolution was the only topic Zach was willing to talk about. But it's during high school that Zach gains a new obsession: the VH1 hit TV show The Pickup Artist, hosted by the pickup artist himself, Mystery. And if you don't remember the show, it was a short-lived but beloved program that taught men how to pick up women, using specific tactics like peacocking by wearing outlandish and not flattering clothing, and being, generally speaking, sexually aggressive and handsy with strangers. Well, Zach got hooked on this show and became a mega fan, even running the Mystery fan club for 3 years. Well, let's just say Zach uses the tactics he learns from the pickup artist and becomes a wild child himself. And he starts wearing insane clothing and donning a look at me hairstyle. Now, this is long before Zach was a performer, but this is actually what starts him on that path. You see, Zach and his then best friend Miko decided to start a party karaoke business called Crazy Karaoke, and this becomes a huge hit in their hometown in New Jersey. College students, bachelorette parties, all sorts of people would rent out this mobile karaoke bus with Miko driving and Zach hosting the karaoke. So the two are actually doing very well with their little business, and that's when they get offered an amazing deal. You see, this was the golden era of reality TV. Everyone was landing shows from exterminators to roadside cleanup crews, and TLC wanted to turn Crazy Karaoke with Miko and Zach into a reality show. So this is obviously insanely great news for these two best friends. But in the coming months, the pressure of the network and all the money being thrown around starts to put a strain on the friendship. You see, in reality shows, most of the drama is conjured up by producers and writers off camera who are intentionally asking questions or inserting ideas to get people fired up. And while filming some test shots before they even got to film the pilot, during an interview, a producer asked the two best friends, Miko and Zach, which one of them could land Sandra Bullock. And this was intended to be a funny, lighthearted question, as clearly neither of these two were in the running for dating a movie star. But apparently, this silly question sparked a real fight between Miko and Zach that got so bad that they were both arrested, and their reality show was immediately scrapped. So now these one-time best friends are on the outs and have lost their biggest opportunity, which you can imagine neither one of them was willing to take the blame for. And that, of course, leads to their karaoke business breaking down as well. So eventually the two reached an agreement that Zach would buy out Miko's portion of the company and he would carry on solo. But on the very trip to deliver the mobile karaoke business, Miko gets into a terrible accident that sends the karaoke bus off the side of a cliff. And needless to say, Miko didn't make it. And here's where things start to get devious. So apparently when they set up the insurance for this business, it was all done over the phone. And the insurance company must have misheard Zach and Miko as Zach Amico, believing it was a one-man operation. So when they went to pay out on the claim, all $250,000 went to Zach, robbing Miko's family of even the ability to pay for his funeral. And they were allegedly forced to throw his body down a waterfall. And some say that this phone call with the insurance company and his choice not to correct the information is where Zach stepped into the dark side, never to return again. So now Zach has more money than he's ever seen and has nothing but time to kill. But that quickly leads to him being haunted by the guilt of taking all the insurance money. But instead of Zach doing the right thing and distributing the money accordingly, he did something crazy and paid VH1's Mystery 50 grand to come stay with him for a month and teach him a deeper knowledge. And in reality, Zach was just paying someone to pacify his evil actions. So Mystery, of course, gladly accepts this money in exchange for helping Zach shed his human feelings. You see, Mystery knew how to entirely cut off the feeling of guilt. Otherwise, he would have to face the 20+ years of sexual crimes he'd been committing. And so Mystery teaches Zach the ancient art of drufashir, which encourages maximum greed and never admitting wrongdoing. And people have confused this belief system, drufashir, with Satanism for its similar pleasure-seeking tenets. But the practice of drufashir is much more sinister. You see, Satanism might be all about pursuing one's own desires, but the practices of drufashir is all about deriving pleasure only from harming others. So once Zach becomes versed in this practice, he becomes unstoppable, and he immediately turns his focus to avenues in life that prey upon the humiliation of others, and starts himself working on reality TV. And this really expanded Zach's world and had him flying to locations all across the US. And while on a job in Atlanta, Zach stumbles upon the ATL twins. And if you don't remember these guys, they're white white boy thug twins that somehow started working at a legal firm. And these guys are truly nuts, having never spent more than 5 minutes away from each other in their entire life. They even share one girlfriend and literally believe they are one person split somehow. And back in the day, Vice did a whole piece on these guys and that shot them into fame, and James Franco's character in the Spring Breakers movie is even based on them. And that's actually them in the movie doing a cameo right there. But long story short, Zach gets acquainted with these two dark figures and starts to learn from them as well. And that's why when we were all first introduced to Zach via Louis J. Gomez, he was said to be Louis's lawyer. You see, Zach used the same trickery as the Atlanta twins and basically pretended to be a lawyer just to network. And online sleuthers believe Zach must have some serious dirt on Louis J. Gomez, because he went from being a shadowy figure in the background introduced as a lawyer to being a literal co-host on Louis's show, The Real Ass Podcast. But what about Zach's involvement with Troma Films? Well, apparently this started when Zach wrote a script for Evolution 2 and became obsessed with getting this film made. Well, you can imagine he couldn't even get big studios to return a call or read this script, and was eventually relegated to Troma or nothing. So they made this poorly received Evolution 2 that featured, of course, none of the original actors and was bizarrely kind of a serious drama movie. And apparently this was so horrible and embarrassing that Zach ever since has been making these intentionally bad Troma movies just so he can claim that Evolution 2 was also supposed to be bad intentionally. And recently Zach was even seen out at the Ivy having lunch with one Sandra Bullock, reigniting the interest in Zach's past discretion. And someone was even able to get a hold of the actual wreckage report from Miko's death. And while there's no definitive proof, it appeared that the brakes of the karaoke bus had recently been altered while under the care of Zach. Now we may never know the truth about this startling scenario, but we do know this: Louis J. Gomez is now stuck with this psychopath who may be controlling his every move. And there's plenty more about this guy, like the fact that he's getting sued by the Jonas Brothers for apparently tricking one of them into eating human poop, or his manic 5-hour Twitch rant about the cultural importance of the movie Evolution, but we'll have to save that for another time. Until then, Zach Bryan, aka Zach Amico, you're a total bitch. Alright everyone, I've been staying with this family for the last 24 hours trying to get them to understand the gravity of comedians' secret lives, but they just aren't getting it. Now they asked me to leave, which of course I did, but I was able to sneak back into their attic space without them noticing. As the TB army grows, the Austin Mafia grows closer. So please do your part and spread this video before I get crushed by the kings of comedy. Okay, it's time to talk about Scott Aukerman, because this would-be nice guy has just shown his true colors, and his career is about to end. Now, if you don't know Scott, you definitely know his work, as he was a part of the revered HBO comedy series Mr. Show with Bob and David, the Zach Galifianakis series Between Two Ferns, and the long-running improv comedy podcast Comedy Bang Bang. But few people know Scott's dirty little secret. Now, apparently this story starts back at birth. You see, Scott was born in Cairo, Egypt, because his father was a phraseologist. And if you don't know what that is, he basically gets paid to create new cultural phrases. And Scott's father was actually the one who created the term brain fart, and that's what really put him on the map, and made him a sought-after phraseologist. So Scott's father had accepted a year-long contract in Cairo, and in that time, Scott was born. And of course, we all know Scott didn't grow up there, and he spent most of his youth in Los Angeles. And Scott had, for the most part, your average suburban childhood, but he was known as a little bit of a klutz, and even gained the nickname Mr. Glass because of how frequently he seemed to get hurt. Now, around age 12, Scott's family once again moves out of the country for a year-long contract, this time in Mexico City. And apparently, the young Scott Aukerman was pretty unhappy about this. He was getting pulled away from all of his friends to live in a place where he didn't even speak the same language. So you can imagine this was not a fun year for Scott, who mostly just stayed indoors and watched American movies. And apparently the only friends Scott had made in Mexico were some young punks who liked to graffiti with markers on the city wall. And as you can imagine, the one time they got caught, unlucky Scott was the only one who didn't get away. And this wasn't a big deal or major crime by any means, but it did leave Scott feeling like he had some type of curse, as it seemed like he was always the only one who got in trouble. Not to mention the embarrassment of having to explain his graffiti tag name to the police officers. You see, Scott, being a massive movie fan, would always tag Martin Scorsese, and when he explained who the movie director was to the police, they all burst out laughing. And you have to admit, it was an odd thing for this American 12-year-old to be tagging movie director names in Mexico. And this did scare Scott straight for the most part, and he didn't try tagging again until he was back in the States. And so during high school, Scott remains a big movie buff, but he also gets really into music. And after graduating high school, Scott even starts doing the lights for a live show of an LA band called Static X. And if you don't know them, they were the premier industrial rock band of the era. Now, after touring the US for 2 years doing lights for this crazy rock band, the touring lifestyle just wasn't stable enough, and he missed having autonomy over his everyday life. So Scott quits the Static X crew and decides to go to college for his first love of film and performance. But it's during his first class at the Pacific Conservatory of Performing Arts that a light fixture fell from the ceiling and broke Scott's arm. And this was the final straw for Scott. He knew no person could be this unlucky, and he spent the next few months researching curses. You have to remember this is very early internet, so he wasn't able to gather information the way you might today, but he used his school's library to read everything he could find about ancient Egypt. And at some point, Scott stumbles upon something that seems connected: the ancient Cairo curse of Carminati. And apparently this stems from the pharaoh Carminati, who believed he had some type of bad luck and prayed to Ra to take it away. And so the deal was Ra would take the pharaoh's bad luck away, but only if the pharaoh would leave this land and never come back. So as the story goes, the pharaoh tried to trick God and temporarily leaves, only to sneak back into the city wearing a disguise. Well, obviously you can't trick God, and so Ra then bestows 100 times the bad luck upon the deceptive pharaoh. And so some believe that there is a curse for those born in Cairo who aren't supposed to be there. Now, of course, there's no way to prove a curse exists, but on the other hand, you can't really prove that it doesn't. And so Scott spends the next year of his life wrestling in his mind with this concept. He wonders if he's just going crazy and trying to ascribe meaning to completely random events. That is, up until he sees a news report about a new hyper-violent gang, MS-13, coming out of his hometown of LA. And that's when Scott's brain broke. You see, when Scott came back from Egypt when he was younger, he did continue to do graffiti, but he shortened his tagging name from Martin Scorsese to MS, and started including his age at the time, 13. So Scott Aukerman had spent years tagging MS-13 around LA when he was young, and had all but forgotten about it up until this moment when he realized he had inadvertently started America's most violent street gang to ever exist. And once Scott realized this curse was real, he knew there was no sense in trying to fight it. Scott decided if you can't beat him, join him, and started following the dark practices of ancient Egypt. So Scott immediately drops out of performing arts college and forsakes the idea of making meaningful art. In fact, he forsakes the idea of even being a human. He was now letting the curse of Carminati have complete control. And unsurprisingly, it worked, seeing Scott quickly employed by the breakthrough HBO comedy series Mr. Show. And while Scott was mostly a writer on the show, you can see him performing characters on the later seasons. And the behind-the-scenes Mr. Show book talks all about how every sketch Scott wrote had to be rewritten because he always included a scene where someone eats human poop, which was of course never going to make it past the censors. And while all Mr. Show fans know that cast member Jay Johnson was arrested for participating in the January 6th attack on the Capitol, most don't know that the only reason Jay was even there was to meet with Scott, who claimed he had an acting role for him. So Scott set up the apolitical Jay to appear to be a fanatical maniac, and insiders say this was all because of an offhanded comment Jay had made back while filming Mr. Show. Apparently Scott would frequently play Static X at work in the writer's room, and one time Jay said, "I'm not sure if I like this music." And that was all it took for Scott to plan for 20 years to take him down. And after writing on the show and experiencing the amount of work it took, Scott decides to focus entirely on improv comedy. And if you don't know what improv comedy is, it's the lowest form of performance art that sees would-be comedians run onto stage with zero material and act out a scene they're all making up on the spot. And you can imagine just how horrible and stilted this type of performance is. And that's why improv comedy has the self-prescribed rule of yes and, which means whatever someone says on stage you have to support and go with. And this rule also applies to the audience, who are forced to applaud and support this overtly unfunny comedy style. So Scott uses his Mr. Show credibility to create a podcast that he has to do zero work on. And it's around this time that Scott marries a shadowy figure named Kulop. And this took some real digging, but I was finally able to uncover her murky past. You see, Kulop's mother was Sharon Maynard, also known as Yoda, who was Axl Rose's spiritual counselor during the height of Guns N' Roses. And this is entirely real, you can look this up, but I don't think Scott is using Kulop to avoid any evil energy. In fact, I think it's quite the opposite. These two seem to have teamed up to wreak havoc upon the nation. You probably all remember when they turned Scott's podcast Comedy Bang Bang into a TV show that totally flopped after the fan backlash from Scott humiliating Weird Al on the Christmas special. And it was right after the show ended that Wayne Static, the lead singer of Static X, tragically passed away in 2014. It seemed the curse of Carminati was alive and well. And though there's been much speculation over who the new masked singer really is, some believe it might actually be Scott himself. And if you look at Static X's touring dates for the last few years, they directly correlate with Scott's Instagram photo locations. And there's plenty more weird stuff about this guy, like the fact that every time he's a guest on Kill Tony, he pulls out his balls, including in the most recent MSG show, or the fact that his house is made entirely out of crystals. But we'll have to save that for another time. Until then, Scott Aukerman, you're a total bitch. Okay, you guys, I've been off the grid for a few days hiding out. The Austin Mafia must have had a GPS on my hard drive, because upon returning back from Krispy Kreme, I found the house that I had been hiding in shot up full of bullets. Unfortunately, the entire Gunther family has passed. If only they had heeded my advice about Joe List. Now, at the time, I didn't know where the KT cartel had placed this GPS, so I stripped down to the nude and ran back into the forest under the cover of night. I had to break into a local TCBY to get computer access to release this episode. For now, I'm in the nude and on the run. TB Nation, it's time to rise up and spit in the face of the axis of Texas terror. Please share this video with anyone you trust to recruit to the TB Army. Okay folks, it's time to talk about Lauren Compton, because this fraudster's party days are coming to an end. Now, a lot of people don't understand how Lauren has become so famous so quickly, while offering nothing substantially different by way of podcasting. And though she relies on her cleavage for attention on this audio medium, you might be surprised to learn how she ended up here. Now, before she was part of YMH Studios, Lauren was actually only known in the low-budget horror film scene. And this is real, go check out her IMDb. She's been in movies like Attack of the Killer Donuts, Clowntown, 360 Degrees of Hell, Death House, Killer Camera Monsters, Asylum, and many more unknown pseudo-pornographic horror movies. And Lauren Compton only ended up in this genre of film because her then-boyfriend, rapper Daddy X from the Cottonmouth Kings. You see, Daddy X loved low-budget horror movies as well as pornography, and so he encouraged his girlfriend to participate whenever possible. And you can imagine, within this scene of losers, Lauren was considered pretty attractive, and found it surprisingly easy to land roles in these zero-pay, semi-nudie films. And from her time spent with Cottonmouth Kings and other white rappers, Lauren eventually gains the confidence to start rapping herself. And that's actually where the name Compton came from. You see, Lauren's real last name is Pompon, but Daddy X and the Cottonmouth King crew would always just call her Lauren Compton. And so in this era of her life, she's kind of a big fish in a small pond. And for a few years, she remained completely unchallenged. But though Lauren might insist she's a hottie, we have evidence to prove otherwise. Okay, so this is going to sound fake, so please, once again, go out there and do your own research, look this up, because this is absolutely real. So there's a comedian named Jason Vest, aka a Kill Tony Plant, who hosts the Tony Hinchcliffe-owned Prettiest Butthole competition in Michigan. And yes, you heard me right, this is real. They have a Prettiest Butthole competition. This is not a joke. This is a real competition where judges look at women's buttholes and judge which they like best, from the minds of Tony and Redbar. So while this seems like something no one would want to participate in, it actually comes from an even grosser origin. So apparently when the competition started, it was actually about who has the worst smelling gas, and female participants would spray their foul scents into the faces of the judges. Well, this competition eventually had to be changed after one contestant accidentally shot some poop into the mouth of Ian Finance. Now, Ian of course had zero complaints and actually enjoyed it, but the health and safety regulations weren't going to allow this to continue, so they changed it to the Prettiest Butthole competition. Now, I don't know what it is with these comedians wanting to engage in this sickening debauchery, but it seems like a lot of these people only became successful to participate in things like this. Now, before this competition was changed, Lauren Compton was the 5-year running champion, with gas so heinous that it sent someone to the hospital every year. And in truth, Lauren has a hormonal condition called Hone syndrome, and it's one of the rarest disorders on Earth, with the last person diagnosed with it passing away in 1972. Now, this condition basically makes Lauren's body into a super saturated fart machine, and regardless of what she eats, the rotting pumpkin-y smell will emerge from her rump. Now, here's where this takes an interesting turn. Some night, Lauren and her friends were a bit drunk at her house, and they decided to try to light one of her renowned farts on fire. Well, when they did this simple goof, it actually blew up half of her entire house. Luckily, her friends were all standing facing away from Lauren's butt, and the blast incinerated only furniture and the walls, but because of the explosion, police and firefighters were dispatched to the scene. Well, long story short, the police of course didn't believe a fart caused this destruction, but when forensics were called to the scene, they couldn't believe what they were seeing, and even got the FBI involved. You see, Lauren's Hone syndrome is producing lithantium, an incredibly rare and sought-after substance, making her horrid gas very valuable. So it's at this point that Steve Rannazzisi's father's company, Raytheon, gets involved and signs Lauren to a massive deal. And I know what you're thinking, why give her anything? Raytheon and Magellan are the most powerful corporations in the world. Well, in reality, with gas this bad, Lauren really held all the cards in her crack. If anyone tried to detain her, be it man, beast, or robot, she could simply fart, killing them on sight. And now that she knew her ass could be weaponized, she became essentially a supervillain. And that's how Lauren got her own show on Tom Segura's network. It's not because Tom thinks she's hot, it's because Tom's being held at ass point. and he's well aware that he's not in control. And if you've ever watched Lauren's podcast, she tries to make it appear that men are uncomfortable because of her cleavage, when in reality, they're uncomfortable because they know the stinky truth. And as much as Lauren has been able to use her bad gas to dominate financially, love hasn't been that easy. Now, she has indeed been linked romantically to many people, but all of them have left as soon as they got a whiff. Even her longtime boyfriend Steve-O just couldn't handle the stink and left Lauren in 2018. And Steve-O leaving you because of your smell is really saying something. And this is where we finally start to see Lauren stumble. You see, after this breakup is when she released her first full-length rap album, Wet Ass, and attempted to rebrand as a ratchet hood rat, but she only kept up this persona for about 2 weeks before completely dropping the routine. But thankfully in 2020, Lauren finally found stability in a relationship with Farnsworth Bentley, the umbrella-wielding valet and personal assistant to Sean Diddy Combs in the early 2000s. And it's been reported by insiders that Farnsworth was actually born without the scent receptors most people have in their nose and tongue, making him entirely immune to Lauren's sulfuric burning green gas. And while you might look at that and think that's a perfect match, Raytheon doesn't see it that way. You see, Raytheon uses Lauren's genetically synthesized gas to create the deadly chemical LC-1021 to build city-leveling weapons. And they don't like the idea that there's someone in Lauren's camp who's immune to the stink and could potentially control her. And that's why Farnsworth has been spewing what appears to be insanity online, constantly claiming his life's in danger from Raytheon. But poor Farnsworth Bentley doesn't seem to understand that all these internet platforms are under Magellan's control. So any evidence he tries to put out there just gets suppressed internally. Farnsworth's best bet is to strip naked and run into the woods like I did. And in truth, with Lauren's gas being used to silence voices across the world, no one is safe. Alright, that's it for now. Until next time, Lauren Compton, you're a total bitch. Okay everyone, I'm still naked and on the run, but I've managed to string together some trash as clothing. After wandering the streets and getting covered in filth, I'm starting to see my mind dissolve. It's only now that I'm exiled out here in the streets that I realize the dark truth. Just like me, any insane-looking street person walking around talking to themselves was driven here by the Austin Mafia. There's potential that every single homeless person across this great nation was once just a journalist like me, who was chased into the streets and driven mad. Knowing this, I had to move quick before my mind was gone. I snuck into the trunk of an Escalade and have rewired the GPS system to give me internet and upload this report. I have no idea where this Escalade is driving, but I'm on the move. TB Nation, protect the homeland in my absence. Okay folks, I've uncovered something about Brendan Schaub that no other journalist has dared to touch, and this story will blow your mind. So everyone told me there's no reason to even cover Brendan as the internet has been feasting on him for years. But what if I told you everyone else's coverage was completely incorrect? So everyone thinks Brendan Schaub was a UFC fighter who befriended a UFC announcer, Joe Rogan, and then launched into a hasty stand-up comedy career and a series of self-imposed podcast controversies. But even if you stop for a second to think about it, this story doesn't make sense. You see, while under contract with the UFC, fighters aren't allowed to befriend announcers, refs, hosts, or any other insiders for legal reasons. And Joe and Brendan have shifted the year they met multiple times in interviews to make their fake relationship make sense. Now, everyone knows Brendan put out a comedy special very early into his career and that his friends advised him not to. And while the backlash he gets might seem like a reason to quit, this is actually exactly what Brendan wants. You see, if you check the metadata and the geoanalytics of Brendan's comedy special, you'll see that while Gringo Poppy has 2.2 million views in America, in South Korea it has over 500 million views. And if you use a VPN and jump onto YouTube in South Korea, you'll see the exact opposite coverage of Brendan by commentators. Instead of hating on Brendan, South Korea seems to have the same level of positive passion for it. So this got me searching, jumping from country to country to assess the data, and what I found was unexplainable. It seems that much like Fraggle Rock was designed to be aired all over the world with literal universal appeal, Brendan Schaub's comedy seems to have coded every country that has internet access. And here's the weird thing, every country has an entirely different take on Brendan and his flub-ups, and you can see it echoed in their respective online commentary. And after arranging a phone interview with a German man regarding Brendan, he was baffled at the idea of Americans not respecting him. Apparently in Germany, Brendan is not only respected but greatly feared. This German man was shocked that I would openly speak anything negative about Schaub. So what did it all mean? So many opposing ideas about one mediocre man. Finally, I stumbled upon some classified G-Wayne legal firm form documents on the brown web, and learned about an artificial intelligence program they built that uses localized algorithms to detect not what people want to see, but what will get them talking most. And so this technology will take figures like Brendan Schaub, Vin Diesel, or Taylor Swift and detect what will get a geographical region talking about this person, good or bad. And this is the same technology that social media uses to show you things that make you angry and create more engagement. But G. Wayne, and by extension the Magellan Corporation, have had this technology since 1991. So Brendan is a mediocre entertainer at best, rakes in millions of quote-unquote hate views, and no one seems to question why we're even talking about this guy. There's plenty of undeserving comedians that we should be shitting on, but for some reason Brendan's name stays at the top of the pile, and we're all just accidentally feeding the machine by clicking on these anti-thick boy videos. And when people realize the truth about what's going on here, their first thought is usually that we have to stop this AI bullshit, as corporations are going to use this to line their pockets by making videos we click on out of sheer anger. Well, to those people, all I have to say is, it's already happened. What if I told you that Brendan Schaub wasn't really a stupid human, but an incredibly intelligent machine? You see, in 1996, Magellan acquired Lockheed and Martin and started developing the Brendan Schaub, or battlefield robots engaged in networks drone assaults for national security, strategic cybernetic hybrid autonomous units for battlefield superiority. These machines are designed to look and act like humans, but are basically indestructible and use human feces as a fuel source. And this robot is smart enough to trick you by playing dumb. And this isn't even the first generation of Schaubs. The original Brendan was released in 1999 and put out the song Blue Dabba Dee that had the same intended love-hate relationship and saw the song garner millions and millions of dollars for Magellan. Now, this current Brendan model has tapped into the stand-up and podcast space, but I think I've spotted the newest Magellan release in the form of Canadian white rapper BBNO. So in summation, every time you've ever seen Brendan Schaub misspeak or make a fool out of himself, he's actually doing incredibly complicated math and arriving at exactly what to say to get you to comment. And everyone around Brendan has no clue. People like Brian Callen and Joe Rogan just see Brendan as the goof, not knowing he's actually controlling their every move with his strategic algorithmic planning. In fact, every single story from asking Andy Letterman to walk to his car to the Reddit-based Bobby Lee feud are all plot lines developed by the Schaub bot to keep his name in the headlines. So while you might like to talk shit and make fun of him, there really is no Brendan, just a computer program that uses your disdain to monetize. And there's plenty more proof of Brendan being a bot, like the time that he malfunctioned and started reciting the dialogue to the Disney movie Johnny Tsunami, or the time those green lasers were seen coming out of his eyes at the TGI Fridays in Times Square. But we'll have to save that for another time. Until then, Brendan Schaub, you're a total bitch. Okay everyone, if you're still keeping track, I was hiding in the trunk of an Escalade, and when I popped out to surprise the driver, it must have startled him because he jerked the wheel, flipping the car, ejecting the driver and passenger and killing them both immediately. It was only then that I realized this Escalade was full of bricks of cocaine that had now spilled out all over the roadway. Well, I couldn't stick around and get arrested for these drug dealers' refusal to wear seatbelts, so I grabbed 1 or 2 bricks of coke and ran into the desert. With no water or clothes, I'll certainly need this speed to get me across this vast barren wasteland. Who knows where Tony and the Aussie Mafia are, but I do know this: they won't give up until they've destroyed every possibility of comedy. Until I get to internet again, TB Nation, rise up. Okay folks, it's time to talk about Bobby Kelly, because his big secret was just revealed by TNN. Now if you're anything like me, you've seen Bobby Kelly floating around the comedy scene for years, and never thought to give him a second look. Well, a second look is exactly what you need when it comes to Bobby Kelly. You see, when Bobby Kelly was in high school, he happened upon the book The Art of War in his school library. But after reading a few pages, he lost interest and instead checked out the book The Art of Association. And this little known book is where Bobby learned everything he knows. Now, the basic tenets of this book revolved around using your perceived association with someone to your benefit, and included many in-depth tactics and tips on how to do this. So the first thing Bobby Kelly does after high school is start going by Robert Kelly. And sure, that is his real name, but the only reason he insisted people start calling him Robert was to create confusion between him and the newly famous R. Kelly. And so apparently Bob would get booked for appearances as Robert Kelly, with people assuming they were getting the singer to perform at their wedding or party, only to find the the white Bobby Kelly stepping out onto stage. And by then, it was too late. Most of the time, the people who booked the performances were too embarrassed to even admit they booked the wrong person. And so Bobby would pocket amazing fees for his average singing. But one night, Bobby was booked to play the birthday of Roland Gift, the lead singer of the Fine Young Cannibals. And if you know anything about these guys, they don't fuck around. The Fine Young Cannibals might be a British pop band, but they also started off as a violent street gang. So when Bobby entered the stage and started singing, he was immediately stopped by Roland. Now apparently Roland yelled out, "That's not R. Kelly," and the crowd grew silent. Bobby might not have known the Fine Young Cannibals' tendency towards hyperviolence, but he could feel the cold chill enter the room. Now after the Fine Young Cannibals' bassist flashed a gun, this scared Bobby so badly that he accidentally farted, which shocked everyone so much that the room erupted in laughter. And Bobby immediately launched into trying to explain that it wasn't him who farted, but that just made everyone laugh even louder. And apparently the Fine Young Cannibals now believed Bobby was a comedian and that this was all intentional. And that's what got Bobby Kelly into stand-up comedy, a new grift. And while Bobby has been relatively successful for many years, if you look back you'll notice every 5 years or so Bobby Kelly looks unrecognizable compared to his former self, completely shape-shifting not only his looks but even his voice. You see, Bobby learned the only way to stay in the game was to change into whatever the industry wanted at that time. And that's why while opening for Jim Brewer, Bobby was the All-American from North Dakota. But when he was opening for Dane Cook, he was claiming to be Cuban and had a thick accent. And then when he started showing up on the Opie and Anthony show, he all of a sudden had a Boston accent. And so Bobby keeps changing to be whatever the audience wants, slowly climbing the ladder. And we all know the inside story about how Bobby used his devious association tactics to actually talk Dan Soder into quitting the Bonfire, telling him Big J was weighing him down with his dirty sex comedy. And eventually Dan starts to believe he could be the next Michael Jackson if only he branched away from his controlling father, Joe Jackson, who in this metaphor would be Big J. Well, we all know what happens next. Dan leaves the Bonfire and Bobby Kelly starts his reign of stench. And if you listen to the Bonfire, you know this is absolutely true and not a joke. Bobby Kelly will regularly talk on his publicly broadcast radio series about chopping up his son's giant shits to fit in the toilet. And again, this is not a joke. I've almost wrecked the car from vomiting when he talks about this. And one time he recounted chopping up his son's poop with a metal coat hanger and then some of it flung back into his mouth. Now this isn't a fake story for comedy. He's not trying to be funny. He literally does this and openly talks about it. But if you know Bobby Kelly, you know this is child's play. You see, every time Bobby has farted in the Sirius XM office, it's caused a building-wide evacuation. And again, if you don't believe me, just listen to the show or ask Jacob or Black Luke, who have been in serious on-air fights about this disgusting gas. And here's where Bobby has run into trouble. You see, the art of association is a tactic to help you climb a social ladder. But what happens when you reach the top? Well, now that Bobby is more famous than ever, he can't just change his story and become whatever the audience wants. And it's become exceedingly clear that Bobby Kelly doesn't have any material of his own. Fans have reported going to his stand-up shows only to find Bobby running out of material 10 minutes in and doing strange endurance challenges for the rest of the set. Well, while some think Bobby's on the downward trend, I started to wonder if this too could be an act. And that's when I read this TNN article that alleges Bobby Kelly may be pulling some type of long con, where he essentially kills off his own career, but only because he's secretly been building another. That's right, comedian Adrian Appalucci is actually really just Bobby Kelly in a wig. It seems that Bobby Kelly had mastered the art of association and moved on to the art of appropriation. And there's plenty more strange things about this guy, like the fact that he took Rachel Dolezal to the BET Awards and they were both wearing see-through silk one-piece suits, or his strange tiny house in the woods with no plumbing that he routinely brings comedians to who conveniently all go missing. But we'll have to save that for another time. Until then, Bobby Kelly, you're a total bitch. Okay everyone, if you remember last time I ran into the desert with 2 bricks of cocaine and no clothing or water. Well, the bad news is the cocaine is all gone. But the good news is I managed to run across the entire Mojave Desert in 45 minutes. I reached the Sierra Nevada mountains and found some small outposts with a large antenna. And I was able to rewire this system and obtain maximum internet. But without any food, I won't last long in these mountains. I can feel the Austin Mafia drawing closer. It's almost like they have a supernatural force on their side. Well, TB Nation, we cannot let these mediocre at best comedians win. I refuse to raise a child in a world where Aaron Berg is considered a comedian. TB Nation, rise up and share this video with everyone you can before the axis of Texas terror takes over the earth. Okay folks, it's time to talk about Mark Maron, because this comedian/podcaster has been getting away with his trickery for far too long. So everyone knows the Mark Maron story about being a bitter stand-up who burnt many bridges and eventually started a podcast to confront his many gripes, and how that became a massive success after Mark thought his career was dead in the water. But how did Mark ever turn into this resentful person he used to be to begin with? While Mark will tell you all about his dealings with drugs and crazy comedians like Sam Kinison, he's been very tight-lipped about his origins before comedy. Well, it won't surprise any of you to know Mark was originally pursuing music. And if you listen to his podcast, you definitely know this, as he ends every episode by jamming on his guitar. But long before Mark graced the stage with his comedic rants, he was rocking out with his band Community Spirit. And in the late 80s, his band starts gaining some traction with a new grungy spiritual sound. And it's at this point that a few labels start approaching the band to sign a real deal. Well, as has happened many times, the band internally disagrees whether to take the deal or not, with Mark being the only one who thought they should wait. Well, instead of supporting the actual founder of this band, Mark, the other guys opted to sign the deal without him. And with Mark owning the name Community Spirit, the band changed their name to something similar, Collective Soul. And by 1992, the band minus Mark was huge. Now this would mark the first of many times that some type of shady business would occur that cut Mark out of his own deal. So once Collective Soul blows up, Mark fell into a depression, which makes total sense. But this is where Mark turns to drugs for the first time, finding that cocaine would lift his spirits, even if only temporarily. And after becoming a regular user of this drug, Mark started finding himself in locations he never thought he would have been. Terrifying places like musical improv shows. And if you don't know what that is, it's the only art form lower than improv that sees would-be musical theater performers run onto stage with zero material and make up songs on the spot, as if that's funny. But the coked up Mark saw this as a unique challenge and soon found himself on stage outperforming everyone. And soon, Mark's love of performing music on stage developed into a love of doing cocaine and screaming on stage. And in the early 90s, this was all the rage, and Mark quickly landed a TV gig on Comedy Central's short attention span theater. So it seemed Mark had made it. He was now a TV show host and assumed he would just move up the ranks like all his predecessors. But he once again found that being cutthroat is how people actually advance. You see, while hosting this TV show, Mark had been writing a kids sitcom to sell to Nickelodeon. But after showing it to a producer on his show, he was horrified to find out his idea was stolen when Nickelodeon started airing My Brother and Me. And Mark did try to fight this in court, claiming he was the one who came up with the concept of these two young black brothers and their friend Goo. But in that era, before everything was written on computers, Mark was unable to prove that he was the original creator. And soon after this, Mark lost his TV show host position and found himself jobless and desperate. He couldn't prove it, but he felt as if he had now been blacklisted in Hollywood and found it impossible to land any worthwhile jobs. So much so that Mark was forced to choose between working at his local grocery store or taking the role of rock and roll ghost on a low-budget kids show. Well, cocaine ain't cheap, so Mark took the job as flabber on Big Bad Beetleborgs for 2 seasons. And it's safe to say the amount of blow he was doing left Mark with zero memories of even being on this show. And it's after Big Bad Beetleborgs is canceled that Mark goes back to stand-up comedy full-time. He had to stick to a career that would allow him to continue to snort snow. But as we all know, you can only push your own feelings away for so long. And eventually, even the cocaine couldn't lift Mark's spirits. He had reached rock bottom and had nowhere to turn. And this is where it gets weird. For most people, when you reach drug addiction's rock bottom, it's a slow rebuilding of your life if you even get that chance. But somehow, Mark goes from absolute addiction and eviction to having a hit podcast before people even knew what podcasts were. Well, there's only one possible explanation. That's right, Magellan. You see, apparently the Magellan Corporation had been keeping an eye on Mark and were just waiting for him to have nowhere else to turn. And this is a classic Magellan tactic. They'll wait until you're about to jump off a bridge and then offer a lifeline, securing that you have nowhere to go without them. And so Mark apparently signed with Magellan under the condition that Collective Soul would be taken down. And you'll notice ever since 2006, when Mark signed with Magellan, guitar-based music has been on a steady decline. Well, this is no coincidence. Magellan has made good on their deal with Mark by slowly removing any rock from the radio. But as you've heard, the unintended consequences have left most Americans wishing they could go back in time, if only for one more day to hear POD on the radio. So in a shocking genie-like twist, Mark's wish to destroy Collective Soul collectively stole rock and roll from our souls. Even the world's most respected guitarist Steve Vai has been banned from playing the instrument, forcing him to create his own wild musical machine called the Hydra. And even Mark's podcast only makes sense in the context of the powerful Magellan Magellan Corporation. Just think about it. How would an unsuccessful comedian get people who he's offended to volunteer their time to come to his garage and talk about their beef? It just doesn't make sense. Unless every guest is forced there by Magellan. And it's even rumored that everyone who's appeared on Mark's show is actually blackmailed into this position, not wanting their poop-eating videotapes to get out. And to those who say this is a far-fetched idea, fine, go on believing the President of the United States met up with this unknown comedian in his garage to record themselves talking. And there's plenty more controversies that Magellan has helped Mark cover up, like the time he slapped Brandy in the face at the Gospel Lyrics Awards show, or the many reports of Flabber, the Jay Leno/Elvis-inspired ghost being seen walking the streets of LA. But we'll have to save that for another time. Until then, Mark Maron, you're a total bitch. Okay everyone, if you're keeping up, I'm on the run from the Austin Mafia in the mountains, and unfortunately, after rewiring this antenna tower, it seems to have overcharged and sparked a fire. While this is generally a negative thing, this smoke might provide me some much needed cover from Tony and the goons. My plan is to light 1 or 2 more mountains on fire to throw them off the trail, and then head for the ocean. TB Nation, things are heating up. Okay folks, it's time for a special report about Kurt Metzger. Now you might not recognize his face, but you definitely recognize his voice, as he was one of the lead characters in the massive hit adult cartoon Ugly Americans. But Kurt's rise to power has been anything but organic. Now it is true that Kurt was raised Jehovah's Witness and was even an ordained minister himself. That is, until he happened upon the comedy of Marlon Wayans. And it was Kurt's love of the 1998 classic comedy hit Senseless that started his journey away from his religion. You see, this film that's full of comedic gold is also full of scientific truths that clashed with Kurt's long-held beliefs. And after Kurt read that Marlon Wayans' father was himself a Jehovah's Witness, and that Marlon had rebelled and not followed in his father's footsteps, Kurt knew what he had to do: completely copy everything about Marlon Wayans. So the new Kurt emerges and hits the comedy scene hard. People had never seen an open micer with such charisma, but they had no idea he was just emulating Marlon Wayans in the 1998 classic Senseless. And after his performance on Showtime's White Boys in the Hood, Kurt gets approached by a big-time talent firm, LK Management. Apparently, Kurt naively signed with this company, but it could be argued that he didn't have any other offers anyways, so why not? Well, soon, Kurt found out exactly why he should have not. So after a couple weeks, Kurt gets set up with his first LK Management gig. And Kurt does his regular stand-up set to a packed room and does well. But he's dumbfounded when after his stand-up comedy set, 2 men wearing suits set up a projector and give a PowerPoint presentation on timeshares in Florida. And apparently after another few odd gigs like this that ended in someone attempting to sell products to the crowd, Kurt went back to his contract and actually read what he had agreed to. You see, LK Management is actually a high-level pyramid scheme owned by Lenny Kravitz. It's basically the new Enron, and once you're in, it's pretty much impossible to get out. This devious company uses celebrities' magnetizing power to get would-be customers in the room and sell them on any bogus product that comes across their greedy hands. So now Kurt realized the truth. He was under Lenny's complete control, and disturbingly, Kurt didn't even put up a fight. You see, Kurt didn't mind the perks of LK Management. After all, they give you good gigs, good pay, and you're getting your name out there and legitimately becoming famous. And maybe it was the structure that felt familiar to religion, or maybe it was simply greed. But within a few years, Kurt Metzger is at the highest pyramid level attainable, along with Danny Bonaducci just below Lenny himself. And now, Kurt's so high up at his job, he's actually the one duping young new talent into signing with LK just like he was. And Kurt rose this high in the ranks because his methods were devious. You see, Kurt knew that sex sells, of course, but everyone at the firm used beautiful women to draw in crowds. Kurt needed something different, something stupid. So after a year of studying advanced mathematics and human attraction, Kurt cracked a crooked code. Now you might have heard of the Fibonacci sequence, and that's a mathematical code that's used to calculate the golden ratio that is found in all of nature, and some link it to beauty and facial proportions. But Kurt discovered a new sinister sequence that's not based on the golden ratio, but instead the stupid ratio. You see, in his research, Kurt found that of course beauty scored quite high on straight men's attraction charts, but he discovered that even more sought after than beauty is the trait of stupidity. Now apparently this is all occurring on a subconscious level, but according to Kurt's findings, men are generally drawn towards women who appear to be less intelligent so they can get away with more bad deeds. Whether it's extramarital affairs or talking your straight wife into participating participating in a threesome, aka gay sex. Men seem to find great benefit in a partner who can't think for themselves. And as we all know, how you look doesn't actually dictate your intelligence, but apparently there's a primal side of men's brains that can easily fall for this dumb-looking face. And so Kurt Metzger is the only reason the public has ever even heard of Rihanna or Selena Gomez. And of course, Kurt's newest recruit, Ella Purnell. Men seem to find these dumb-looking faces irresistible. And that's how Kurt rose to the top of LK management. And he's faced virtually no resistance other than a few comedians who have called him out online, and of course the onstage Louis J. Gomez fight that was caused by, of course, Kurt giving Louis the light early so his team could get on stage to sell Neosporin. And though Kurt kept his cool through this exchange while Louis lost it, I think when Louis yelled out, "You've abandoned your Marlon Wayans past," that really cut Kurt deep. It was, in fact, true. It had been years since Kurt sat down in his living room with a bucket of popcorn and his favorite cream soda and watched the 1998 comedy classic Senseless. But the reality was, there was no way out of this pyramid-shaped contract. Anyone who's tried to flee Lenny's grasp has been met with swift physical punishment. So once again, it seems Kurt Metzger has doubled down into his devilish deeds. Now, you might have recently heard about the Sabian Black Egyptian Temple in Bushwick, New York going up for sale. And if you don't know what that is, it's part of the Nuwaubian Nation, which is a strange and controversial religious movement that sees white people as irredeemable and demonic creatures. And that's why it was such a shock when the Brooklyn-based Egyptian Temple's records went public, showing that Kurt was a major financial contributor to the church. Now, no one knows why Kurt would be supporting this of all religions, or why he's recently challenged Chris Kattan to an all-night fist fight, but it seems that Kurt's ideas are becoming less and less tethered to reality. And most recently, Kurt was seen fighting with Trippie Redd in a Seattle club, allegedly because Trippie was refusing to sign with Kurt. And Kurt had this amazing idea about getting Trippie Redd to be the new frontman for Led Zeppelin, dubbing them Trippie Redd Zeppelin. But the young rapper didn't seem to like this idea. Now, there's plenty more weird things about this guy, but we'll have to save that for another time. Until then, Kurt Metzger, you're a total bitch. Okay everyone, if you're keeping track, I think I must have passed out from smoke inhalation because I woke up face down on the ground. But thankfully my naked body was covered with forest fire ash, blending me in perfectly with the surroundings. Luckily, I made it to the beach without crossing paths with Cam Patterson or Ari Matty, but I know they're out here somewhere. I've snuck into a tiny lifeguard shack and rewired this walkie-talkie into a full holographic display system to upload this important report. This may be the last time you ever hear from me, TB Nation, as I'm going to attempt to swim to New York City. If I can make it to New York, maybe I can find a way to shut down the comedy scene for good. It's time to do as Maynard James Keenan requested in 1996 and learn to swim. TB Nation, wish me luck.